Hi there. Tonight we tumble headfirst into the sun-scorched, spice-scented chaos of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Around 500 BCE, you're standing in Persepolis, where towering stone columns loom like giants and the air buzzes with the clatter of donkey carts and merchant shouts. The streets swirl with people in flowing robes, their voices a jumble of tongues you don't understand. And you're already sweating through your modern clothes, which stick out like a neon sign. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive 24 hours here without tripping over some ancient rule or passing out from the heat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not just anywhere. You're in the heart of an empire stretching from Egypt to India, a marvel of roads, armies, and bureaucracy. But as a stranger, you're a fish out of water, and the current's strong. The first thing hitting you is the sheer sensory overload. The market's a riot of color spirals of saffron, turquoise beads, and shimmering silk sput. The smells are a mix of heavenly spices and well-unwashed camels. You're dodging kids chasing a stray goat, and a bearded guard eyes you warily, his spear glinting. You're not sure if you're a guest or a problem, but you're already feeling the empire's pulse. And it's not slowing down for you. Mainstream. History tells us the Achaemenid Empire was a masterclass in organization, with King Darius I running a system of satraps governors who kept the provinces in line. Persepolis was the ceremonial capital, a showcase of power with its grand palaces and reliefs of tribute. But you're not a satrap or a noble. You're just you, and this place doesn't care about your resume. You're trying to blend in, but your sneakers and backpacks scream outsider, and the locals are starting to notice. You're wishing for a time machine to zap you back, but for now, you're stuck. And survival means figuring out the rules fast. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians used a kind of early passport system, clay tablets with seals to authorize travel on the royal road. You don't have one, so you're already on thin ice, like forgetting your ID at an airport, but with scarier consequences. You're imagining yourself trying to charm a guard with a grin and a thumbs up, and you chuckle, thinking they'd probably arrest you for weird hand signals. It's a small laugh, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize you're not just lost in space. You're lost in a world with zero tolerance for strays. Historians still argue whether the empire's diversity was its strength or a ticking time bomb. Some say its mix of cultures, Persians, Medes, Babylonians fueled innovation, while others think it bred suspicion of outsiders like you. You're feeling the suspicion as a merchant squints at you, muttering something in Old Persian. You smile awkwardly, hoping it's not an insult, but your gut says you're not winning any popularity contests. The empire's a machine, and you're a loose cog, liable to get crushed if you don't find your place. You're tempted to hide in an alley, but the smell of something rancid stops you cold. You're already overwhelmed, and it's not even noon. You think of modern conveniences, air conditioning, GPS, a quick coffee run, and realize they're as far away as the moon. The Persians are tough, forged by this harsh world, and you're starting to respect their grit, even if you're not sure you can match it. You crack a quiet joke to yourself. Maybe you'll survive by offering to teach them about Wi-Fi. It's a weak laugh, but it keeps you moving. For now, you're weaving through the crowd, trying to look purposeful. your heart racing as you brace for whatever this empire throws at you next. You're standing in the bustling heart of Persepolis, the clamor of the market swirling around you, but you're frozen, realizing you can't understand a single word anyone's saying. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're slammed by the language barrier, a wall of old Persian, Elamite, and a dozen other tongues that make your head spin. The air's thick with the scent of roasting nuts and sweat, and you're trying to ask for directions, but your gestures are getting you nowhere. You're already feeling like you're drowning in this sea of voices. And survival hinges on communicating something you're spectacularly failing at, mainstream history tells us. The Achaemenid Empire was a linguistic mosaic, with Old Persian as the elite's tongue, but Aramaic was the glue for administration across its vast territories. You're not a scribe or a satrap, so you're stuck with zero context, flailing in a world where even asking for water is a puzzle. You're pointing at a clay jug, hoping the vendor gets it, but he's jabbering back, his hands waving like you've insulted his camel. You're wishing for a translation app, but all you've got is a smile that's starting to feel more panicked than friendly. The crowd's pushing past, and you're a rock in their river, drawing annoyed glances. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians used hand signals for basic trade, a kind of proto-sign language for dealing with foreigners. You're trying it now, mimicking drinking from a cup, but the vendor thinks you're asking for wine and shoves a goatskin at you. You joke to yourself that you're inventing the world's worst charades game, and you'd lose spectacularly. It's a small chuckle, but it keeps you from bolting as you realize you're not just lost, you're mute. A stranger in a world where words are currency, and you're broke. Historians still argue whether the empire's language diversity was a strength or a logistical nightmare. Some say Aramaic's widespread use kept things smooth, while others think local dialects caused constant mix-ups, especially for outsiders like you. You're leaning toward nightmare as a kid tugs your sleeve, shouting something you don't catch, and runs off laughing. You're pretty sure he called you a donkey, but you can't prove it. And the frustration's building like the heat on your neck. You're tempted to mime your way into hiding, but you know you've got to keep trying, or you'll be stuck here forever. You're starting to notice the rhythm of the market, how merchants switch tones depending on the customer, how scribes scribble on clay tablets, probably mocking your accent. You're desperate to pick up a phrase, anything to make you less of a target. You try repeating a word you've heard, maybe water, but the vendor just shrugs, and you're back to square one. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll become the empire's first silent comedian, touring with your terrible hand signals. It's a weak laugh, but it keeps your nerves from fraying as you dodge a cart piled with pomegranates. The language barrier's not just a nuisance. It's a survival threat. You can't ask for food, shelter, or help if you're mistaken for a spy, which, given your weird clothes from Section 1, isn't a stretch. You think back to Persepolis grand reliefs, where everyone seemed to speak the same visual language of power, but here, in the streets, you're voiceless. You're starting to respect the Persians' patience with their babel of tongues, even if they're not extending it to you. You're tempted to find a quiet corner and give up, but you know that's not an option, not in an empire that doesn't coddle strangers. As you fumble through another failed exchange, you spot a scribe eyeing you. His stylus paused. You're not sure if he's curious or suspicious, but you give him a nod, hoping it's universal for "please don't arrest me." You're still lost, still mute, but you're not quitting yet. You take a deep breath, try another gesture this time, pointing at your mouth and the jug and brace for whatever comes next. Knowing every word you don't know is another hurdle in this 24-hour survival game. You're staggering through the outskirts of Persepolis, the sun blazing like a furnace, your skin prickling with sweat that's turning your modern clothes into a soggy mess. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're battling the scorching desert heat, a relentless force that doesn't care about your survival odds. The air shimmers with dust and the faint tang of baked earth, and you're squinting at a horizon that offers no shade. No water, just a cruel promise of more sun. You're already dizzy, and you're learning fast that the Persian climate is as unforgiving as the guards who eyed you in the market. Mainstream history tells us the Persian Empire spanned arid deserts and rugged mountains with summer temperatures in Persepolis often hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more. The locals are used to it, striding past in loose robes that catch the breeze, while you're wilting, your sneakers melting into the sand. You're desperate for shade, but the nearest palm tree is a mirage-level trek away, and your water bottle low. Wait, you don't have oneies, a modern fantasy. You're starting to grasp why the Persians built qanats, underground water channels. But that's no help now, as you stumble, your throat dry as a clay tablet. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians carried goatskin water bags, sealed with resin, to stay hydrated on long journeys. You're eyeing a passing trader's bag, tempted to mime your way into a sip. But you joke to yourself that you'd probably spill it and end up with a soggy sandal instead. It's a weak chuckle, but it keeps you from collapsing as you realize you're not just hot, you're dangerously close to heat stroke, and there's no air-conditioned cafe to save you. You think back to your language flub in the market, wishing you'd at least learned the word for help before this oven of a day hit. Historians still argue whether the empire's climate shaped its resilience or strained its resources. Some say the Persians' mastery of water systems like qanats fueled their success, while others think the harsh environment stretched their limits, especially for outsiders like you. You're leaning towards strained as you trip over a rock, your vision blurring. The locals seem fine, sipping from those goatskins and lounging under woven awnings. But you're a soft, modern soul, unprepared for this solar assault. You're tempted to lie down and surrender, but you know the sand's hot enough to cook you like flatbread. You're scanning for relief, spotting a mud brick wall that might cast a sliver of shade. You shuffle toward it, dodging a lizard that's better adapted than you'll ever be. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll evolve into a camel by sundown, hump and all. It's a delirious laugh, but it keeps your feet moving as you slump against the wall, its faint coolness a lifeline. You're starting to respect the Persians' toughness, their ability to thrive where you're barely surviving. You think of Persepolis' grand palaces, where nobles probably have servants fanning them. And you're jealous, even if you're too parched to care. The heat's not just a physical threat, it's a survival gauntlet. Without water, your hours from collapse, and your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't beg for a drink. You're also realizing your weird clothes from Section 1 are a liability, trapping heat like a personal sauna. You're wishing for one of those flowing robes, but you're stuck, a sweaty beacon of not from here. You're starting to see why the Empire's people are so hardy they've had to be, while you're a tourist in their crucible, and the sun's not taking prisoners as you huddle in the shade. A passing woman with a veiled face tosses you a glance, pity, maybe, or suspicion. You try a weak wave, hoping for mercy, but she moves on, her own water jar balanced effortlessly. You're not sure if you'll make it to nightfall, but you're not giving up yet. You take a shaky breath, Wipe the sweat from your eyes and brace for the next step, knowing the desert's waiting to test you again, and you're running out of tricks to beat it. You're stumbling back into Persepolis' crowded streets, the heat from the desert still clinging to your skin. But now you're hit with a new challenge: the Empire's rigid social hierarchy. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're a nobody in a world where status is everything, and every interaction feels like a high-stakes game of who's to who. The air buzzes with the scent of incense and the clink of silver armlets, but your drawing stares, your modern clothes, screaming out of place louder than a trumpet. You're trying to blend in, but the social ladder's steep, and you're starting at the bottom rung. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire was a pyramid of power, with King Darius I at the top, followed by nobles, satraps, priests, and commoners, each group locked into strict roles. You're not even on the chart, no title, no clan, just a sweaty stranger who doesn't know the rules. You're passing a noble in a gold-trimmed robe, and he glares when you forget to lower your eyes. You're supposed to defer, maybe even step off the path, but you're clueless, and the crowd's muttering. You're wishing for a Persian etiquette 101 guide, but all you've got is a sinking feeling you're about to offend someone important. Here's a quirky tidbit: Persians used specific headgear to signal rank, like tall felt caps for nobles or simple headbands for laborers. You're hatless, your modern haircut a total giveaway, and you joke to yourself that you'd trade your sneakers for a cap to fake some status. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as a guard shoves past, his spear nudging you like you're a stray goat. You think back to the desert heat from Section 3, where you barely survived. Now, you're realizing social missteps could be just as deadly, especially when you can't even speak the language from Section 2. Historians still argue whether the empire's hierarchy unified its diverse peoples or bred resentment among the lower ranks. Some say it kept order, while others think it alienated outsiders like you, making integration impossible. You're feeling the alienation as a merchant snaps at you for standing too close to his stall, his tone dripping with disdain. You're not sure if it's your clothes, your stance, or just your existence, but you're clearly not welcome in his circle. You're tempted to slink away, but the streets are packed, and there's no hiding when you're the odd one out. You're trying to observe, picking up cues from the crowd. Nobles glide through, their attendants clearing the way, while commoners like the bread seller you're eyeing keep their heads down. You mimic her posture, hoping it'll make you less of a target, but your backpack's still drawing looks. And you're cursing your decision to bring it from Section 1. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll claim you're a foreign dignitary and demand a camel escort. It's a delirious chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize you're not just navigating a city, you're navigating a caste system with zero margin for error. The hierarchy is not just about manners, it's a survival trap. Offend a noble, and you could end up in a dungeon or worse. Your language barrier means you can't talk your way out, and the heat's left you too woozy to think straight. You think back to Persepolis' grand reliefs, where tribute bowed to the king, a visual of this rigid order. You're starting to respect the locals' ability to play this game, even if you're flunking it. You're wishing for a low-key corner to regroup, but the streets are a stage, and you're the unprepared actor everyone's booing. As you shuffle forward, a scribe in a linen robe eyes you, his stylus pausing over a clay tablet. You're not sure if he's noting your weirdness or just tallying figs, but you give a weak nod, hoping it's polite. You're still lost, still low on the social totem pole, but you're not giving up. You adjust your posture, keep your eyes down, and weave through the crowd, bracing for the next social minefield. Knowing every step is a test you're barely passing in this 24-hour survival sprint. You're weaving through Persepolis' crowded market, your stomach growling louder than the merchant's shouts. But the food and water in front of you are a gamble you're not sure you can win. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the risks of eating and drinking in a world where hygiene's a mystery and every bite could be your last. The air's thick with the scent of fresh flatbread and overripe figs. But you're eyeing the clay jugs and barley loaves with suspicion, your modern sensibilities screaming food poisoning alert. You're hungry, but survival means navigating this edible minefield without a guide. Mainstream history tells us the Persian diet was hearty but basic, with staples like barley, lentils, and goat meat, often washed down with water or fermented mare's milk. You're staring at a vendor's stall, where flies buzz over a pile of dates and a dubious-looking stew simmers in a pot. The locals are digging in, unbothered. But you're wondering about the water source, probably a river where camels drink, and the cook's hand-washing habits, which are likely non-existent. You're desperate for a bite, but your stomach's doing flips, and you're wishing for a sealed protein bar from your backpack, which, thanks to Section 1, is all you've got going for you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians sometimes flavored their water with crushed mint or pomegranate juice to mask funky tastes. You're offered a cup of this mix now, and you joke to yourself that it's the ancient equivalent of a fruit smoothie, except you're pretty sure it's not organic or FDA approved. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you sip cautiously, the tangy taste hiding who knows what. You think back to the desert heat from Section 3, where you nearly passed out from thirst. Now, you're realizing hydration might come with a side of dysentery, and you're not thrilled about the trade-off. Historians still argue whether the empire's food supply was a logistical triumph or a health hazard. Some say qanats and granaries kept people fed, while others point to frequent famines and waterborne illnesses that hit outsiders like you hardest. You're leaning toward hazard as you chew a stale barley loaf, its grit making you wonder if it's bread or sand. The locals seem fine, their stomachs forged by years of this diet, but you're a soft modern soul, and your guts staging a revolt. You're tempted to skip eating altogether, but you know you'll need energy to keep dodging the social hierarchy traps from Section 4. You're trying to blend in, mimicking the way a woman nearby tears her bread and dips it in oil. She glances at you, maybe amused by your awkwardness, and you give a sheepish smile, hoping it's not a social faux pas from Section 4's rulebook. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a food vlog. Rating Persian stew as 0 stars would not survive. It's a weak chuckle, but it keeps you from bolting as you swallow another bite, praying it stays down. You're starting to respect the Persians' iron stomachs, even if you're nowhere close to matching them. The food risks tie into your growing list of problems. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't ask about the stew's ingredients. And your outsider status makes you a target for vendors pushing questionable goods. You think back to the market's chaos, where you fumbled through gestures, and the heat that left you too woozy to think straight. You're wishing for a fridge, a faucet, anything to make this easier. But you're stuck in a world where fresh means still warm from the goat. You're not sure if you're more scared of starvation or poisoning, but both feel like real contenders. As you finish the loaf, you spot a kid munching happily on a handful of dates, unfazed by the flies. You're not that brave, but you take another sip of the minty water, hoping it's more friend than foe. You're still hungry, still queasy, But you're not giving up. You tuck your backpack closer, adjust your sweat-soaked clothes, and keep moving through the market, bracing for whatever this empire's kitchen throws at you next, knowing every bite is another roll of the dice in your 24-hour survival game. You're standing in a sunlit courtyard, the air heavy with sandalwood and the low hum of chanted prayers, as you're roped into a Zoroastrian ritual you don't understand. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're feeling the pressure to join the empire's religious ceremonies, where every gesture and word is a test of your place in this world. The ground is warm beneath your sneakers, and a priest in a white robe is eyeing you, his hands cradling a bundle of sacred twigs. You're trying to follow along, but you're already sweating, not just from the heat, but from the fear of messing up a divine performance. Mainstream history tells us that Zoroastrianism was the spiritual backbone of the Achaemenid Empire, guiding everything from royal decrees to daily life with its focus on Ahura Mazda, the god of wisdom. You're caught in a fire ritual now, where a small altar crackles with flames that everyone treats like a VIP. The locals are chanting, tossing barley into the fire, and you're supposed to mimic them, but your language barrier from Section 2 means you're mumbling gibberish, hoping it passes for piety. You're wishing for a cheat sheet, but all you've got is a crowd watching you like you're about to insult their god. Here's a quirky tidbit. Zoroastrians sometimes used a sacred drink called hauma, made from a mysterious plant, to connect with the divine during rituals. You're offered a sip from a clay cup, its bitter temps hitting your tongue like a bad energy drink, and you joke to yourself that it's the ancient equivalent of chugging kale juice for spiritual points. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you spill a drop, earning a frown from the priest. You think back to the questionable stew from Section 5, hoping this hauma isn't another health risk, because you're already on thin ice with your stomach. Historians still argue whether Zoroastrianism unified the empire's diverse peoples or alienated outsiders like you. Some say its rituals created a shared identity, while others think its strict purity rules made foreigners feel like intruders. You're definitely feeling the intruder vibe as you fumble the barley toss, grains scattering like your chances of fitting in. The locals are graceful, their movements practiced, but you're a clumsy newbie, and the priest's glare is sharper than the desert sun from Section 3. You're tempted to fake a cough and slip away, but you know running from a sacred rite might land you in bigger trouble. You're trying to keep up, copying the woman next to you as she ties a ritual cord around her waist. She gives you a sidelong glance, maybe pitying your awkwardness, and you offer a weak smile, hoping it's not a social hierarchy blunder from Section 4. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Zoroastrianism for dummies. Class and flunk spectacularly. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a ceremony, it's a loyalty test. And you're failing in front of an audience that doesn't trust outsiders from Section 1. The ritual's demands tie into your growing survival challenges. Your inability to speak Old Persian means you can't learn the prayers, and your weird clothes mark you as someone who doesn't belong at the altar. You think back to Persepolis' grand reliefs, where everyone seemed to honor the same gods. But here, you're a misfit, your presence tolerated only if you play the part. You're starting to respect the Persians' devotion, even if their faith feels like a maze you can't navigate. You're wishing for a modern exit like hitting skip on a tutorial, but you're stuck, and the fire's crackling like it's judging you too. As the chant rises, you toss another pinch of barley, this time landing it in the flames, and you feel a tiny spark of triumph. The priest's frown softens, but you're not out of the woods. You're still lost, still an outsider, but you're not giving up. You adjust your stance, try to match the crowd's rhythm, and brace for the next step in this divine dance, knowing every misstep is another hurdle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the gods aren't handing out free passes. You're trudging along the edge of the royal road, the Empire's famed highway stretching into the shimmering distance. But your heart's pounding as you realize travel here is a gauntlet of dangers. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're desperate to move, maybe to find water or a friendlier town, but the road's no easy path. The air's thick with dust and the sour whiff of camel dung, and you're clutching your backpack, your sneakers sinking into the gravel. Bandits, checkpoints, and the sheer vastness of Persia are looming. And you're learning fast that a stroll here could be your last. Mainstream history tells us the Royal Road was a 1,500-mile marvel, linking Susa to Sardis with relay stations for couriers and travelers. It's the Empire's lifeline, but for you, it's a high-risk gamble. You're not a royal messenger with a sealed tablet from Section 1's quirky passport tidbit. You're a nobody, and the road's crawling with threats. You're passing a crumbled milestone, its cuneiform unreadable thanks to your language barrier from Section 2, and you spot a group of armed men in the distance. They could be guards or bandits, but either way, your weird clothes from Section 1 make you a target, and you're wishing for an invisibility cloak. Here's a quirky tidbit. Travelers sometimes carried dried figs stuffed with almonds as road snacks, a high-energy bite for long treks. You're starving, your stomach still queasy from Section 5's dodgy stew, and you joke to yourself that you'd trade your backpack for one of those figs. Heck, you'd settle for a granola bar. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you duck behind a rock, praying those men don't spot you. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual from Section 6, where you barely passed muster. Now, you're wondering if Ahura Mazda's got to protect clueless travelers. Prayer you could borrow. Historians still argue whether the Royal Road was a secure trade route or a bandit's playground. Some say the Empire's patrols kept it safe, while others point to frequent ambushes that preyed on outsiders like you. You're leaning toward playground as you hear hooves thundering closer, your pulse racing like you're in a bad action movie. The desert heat from Section 3 left you woozy, and the social hierarchy from Section 4 means no one's rushing to save a lowlife like you. You're tempted to sprint back to Persepolis, but you know the city's no kinder with its judging priests and haughty nobles. You're trying to stay calm, scanning for a ditch or a caravan to tail. You spot a group of traders with loaded mules, and you shuffle closer, hoping to blend in, but your sneakers squeak, and a mule brays like you've personally offended it. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll tame that mule and ride it to Babylon, cowboy style. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you moving as you fall and step behind the traders, keeping your head down like you learned in the market. You're starting to respect the Persians' grit, navigating this road like it's no big deal. While you're one wrong move from disaster, the road's dangers tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't talk your way past a checkpoint, and your outsider status makes you suspicious to everyone. You think back to the market's chaos, where you barely bartered for bread, and the ritual's pressure, where you fumbled sacred barley. The road's just another test, and you're failing the prep course. You're wishing for a modern GP saw, even a horse butt. You're stuck on foot, your backpack heavier with every step, and the Empire's vastness feels like it's swallowing you whole as you trailed the caravan. A guard at a checkpoint waves the traders through, but squints at you, his hand on his spear. You try a weak smile, hoping it's universal for just passing through, but your gut says you're seconds from trouble. You're still lost, still vulnerable, but you're not quitting. You adjust your backpack, keep your eyes on the road, and brace for whatever's around the next bend, knowing every mile is another hurdle in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's not rolling out the welcome mat. You're back in Persepolis' chaotic market, the dust from the royal road still clinging to your clothes. But now you're diving into the cutthroat world of bartering, where every deal feels like a verbal sword fight. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're trying to trade for something, maybe water, maybe a shawl to replace your conspicuous modern gear, but the merchants are circling like hawks, and your lack of skills is a glaring weakness. The air's thick with the scent of saffron and sweat, and you're clutching your backpack, hoping to swap a trinket for survival. But you're sinking fast in this haggling chaos. Mainstream history tells us the Persian Empire's markets were economic hubs buzzing with trade from India to Egypt, where bartering was an art form honed over generations. You're standing at a stall piled with clay jugs, trying to offer a shiny keychain from your backpack, but the vendor's laughing, his beard shaking as he waves you off. You don't know the value of anything dates, copper, or those weird silver coins everyone's tossing around, and your language. Barrier from Section 2 means you're gesturing like a frantic mime. You're wishing for a credit card, but here, it's all about the deal. And you're the rookie at the table. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some merchants use knotted cords to track debts, a kind of proto-counting that's way cooler than your keychain offer. You're imagining yourself trying to knot your way into a trade, and you joke to yourself that you'd end up with a tangled mess and a camel you don't want. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the vendor slams a jug down, demanding something actually worth it. You think back to the dodgy stew from Section 5, hoping you're not trading for another gut-churning meal because your stomach's still on strike. Historians still argue whether the Empire's markets were fair or rigged against outsiders like you. Some say skilled hagglers could thrive, while others think foreigners were easy marks, fleeced by savvy locals. You're definitely feeling fleeced as another merchant joins in, his rapid-fire Old Persian drowning you out. The social hierarchy from Section 4 doesn't help. You're a nobody, and these vendors know it. Their smirks sharper than the desert heat from Section 3. You're tempted to walk away, but you need water, and your parched throat from the royal road in Section 7 is screaming for relief. You're trying to learn fast, watching a local woman barter with calm precision, her hands gesturing just enough to close the deal. You mimic her, pointing at a small jug and offering your keychain again. But the vendor rolls his eyes, muttering something that sounds like an insult. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a worst barterer in Persia. Club and crown yourself president. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from throwing your backpack in frustration. You're starting to respect the Persians' haggling prowess, even if you're getting schooled in real time. The market's chaos ties into your survival spiral. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate, and your outsider status makes you a target for scams. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual from Section 6, where you fumbled sacred barley, and the road's dangers, where you dodged bandits. Bartering's another test, and you're flunking, your modern instincts useless in this high-stakes game. You're wishing for a vending machine insert coin. Get water, but you're stuck. and every failed deal feels like another nail in your 24-hour survival coffin. As you fumble through another round, a kid nearby snickers, probably betting on how fast you'll crash and burn. You try a desperate move, pulling a pen from your backpack, hoping its novelty saves you. The vendor pauses, intrigued, but his counter offers a torrent of words you don't catch. You're still lost, still outmatched, but you're not quitting. You adjust your grip on the pen, nod like you know what's happening, and brace for the next verbal volley, knowing every haggle is a step closer to survival or a spectacular failure in this empire's unforgiving arena. You're shuffling through Persepolis' bustling streets, your failed bartering attempts still stinging, when you're handed a heavy woolen robe by a kind but insistent woman who's clearly tired of your modern outfit spectacle. As an outsider, in the Achaemenid Empire, you're grappling with the clothing conformity trap, where your sneakers and backpack are a social death sentence, and these new garments feel like a woolly prison. The air's thick with dust and the faint whiff of dyed fabric, and you're struggling to wrap the robe right, already sweating buckets under its weight. You're learning fast that looking the part is a survival must, but this dress code's a beast. Mainstream history tells us that Persian clothing was practical yet symbolic, with long tunics, trousers, and robes signaling status, gender, and loyalty to the empire's norms. You're not a noble, so your borrowed robe's plain, but it's still a far cry from your breathable t-shirt. The woman's showing you how to pin a veil or headscarf. You're not sure while muttering in Old Persian, and your language barrier from Section 2 means you're nodding blindly, hoping you're not agreeing to wear it forever. The fabric's itchy, and you're tripping over the hem, wishing for your jeans. But your sneakers from Section 1 are already drawing enough stares. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians sometimes dyed their clothes with madder root for a red hue, a process so smelly it was done outside town. You're sniffing your robe now, catching a faint earthy tenth, and you joke to yourself that you're wearing the ancient equivalent of a thrift store, fine complete with questionable aroma. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you realize the veil's slipping, and a passing guard's glare suggests your one wardrobe malfunction from trouble. You think back to the desert heat from Section 3, which this robe's making worse, and pray you don't pass out before figuring this out. Historians still argue whether Persian dress codes were about cultural unity or control over individual identity. Some say they fostered a shared aesthetic, while others think they enforced conformity, especially on outsiders like you. You're leaning toward control as you fumble with the scarf, your hands clumsy under the crowd's watchful eyes. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes it clear. Dress wrong, and you're not just a nobody, you're a problem. You're tempted to ditch the robe and sprint, but you know that'd be a one-way ticket to a dungeon, especially after your market flop in Section 8. You're trying to blend in, copying a man nearby who's adjusting his belt with casual ease. He glances at you, maybe amused by your struggle, and you offer a weak smile, hoping it's not a hierarchy misstep. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian fashion vlog, rating this robe 0 stars for comfort, 5 for sweat. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from ripping the fabric off as you realize this isn't just about style, it's about survival. Signaling you're not a threat or a rebel in a world that's quick to judge. The clothing trap ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't ask for help with the pins, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you a target for scrutiny. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual from Section 6, where you barely passed as pious, and the royal roads dangers from section 7, where your odd look drew eyes. This robe's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern instincts useless against the Empire's dress code. You're wishing for a quick change booth, but you're stuck, and every itch feels like a reminder you don't belong. As you finally get the veil to stay, a kid snickers, pointing at your lopsided attempt. You give a mock bow, hoping humor diffuses the moment, but your gut says you're still a walking red flag. You're not sure if you'll master this outfit, but you're not giving up. You adjust the robe, tug the scarf tighter, and keep moving through the crowd, bracing for the next judgmental stare, knowing every misfold is another test in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's not grading on a curve. You're standing in a dusty Persepolis square, the weight of your itchy new robe dragging you down when a shouting match erupts nearby, and you're suddenly tangled in a legal dispute you didn't start. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the Empire's legal system, a maze of rules where your voice is worth less than a grain of barley. The air's thick with tension and the faint smell of ink from a scribe's tablet, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to figure out why a merchant's accusing you of stealing his figs. You're innocent, but survival means navigating a court that's not exactly rooting for you. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid legal system was advanced, with royal judges and local magistrates enforcing contracts, property laws, and punishments across the empire. But as a foreigner, you're at the bottom of the social hierarchy from Section 4, and your lack of status means you can't speak for yourself. The merchant's waving a clay tablet, claiming it's proof, while a bearded official glares at you, his stylus poised. You're trying to gesture your innocence, but your language barrier from Section 2 turns your defense into a frantic mime act, and the crowd's murmuring doesn't sound friendly. You're wishing for a lawyer, but here, you're on your own, and the stakes feel scarily high. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persian courts sometimes used ordeal by fire to test guilt, like making you hold a hot iron. Thankfully, that's not happening today, but the threat's in the air. You're imagining yourself juggling glowing coals to prove you didn't swipe those figs. And you joke to yourself that you'd drop them and start a new career as a campfire starter. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the official barks something, and you realize you're not just in trouble, you're in a system where outsiders like you from Section 1 are presumed guilty until proven otherwise. Historians still argue whether the Empire's legal system was fair or rigged against the powerless. Some say it protected trade and order, while others think it favored elites and locals, crushing foreigners like you. You're leaning toward rigged as the merchant embellishes his story, claiming you also insulted his camel. The social hierarchy's biting you again, and your robe from Section 9, though proper, isn't enough to make you credible. You think back to the market chaos from Section 8, where you barely bartered for water, and wish you'd stayed clear of this square. You're tempted to run, but the guard's spear says that's a bad idea. You're trying to stay calm, watching a local man nearby who's pleading his own case with confident gestures. You mimic his bow, hoping it buys you some grace, but the official just scribbles faster, and you're not sure if it's a verdict or a grocery list. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll offer your backpack as a bribe and call it modern treasure. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a survival test, and you're up against a system that doesn't care about your side of the story. The legal pitfalls tie into your growing mess. Your language barrier means you can't defend yourself, and your outsider status makes you an easy scapegoat. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual from section 6, where you fumbled through piety, and the royal road's dangers from section 7, where you dodged bandits. This court's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern instincts useless. Against ancient justice, you're wishing for a courtroom drama where you'd yell objection. But here, silence is your only play, and it's not winning any points. As the official confers with the merchant, a small crowd gathers there, whispers echoing the market's judgment. You try a desperate move, pointing at your empty hands to show you've got no figs. But the merchant scoffs, and the official's frown deepens. You're still lost, still voiceless, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, keep your head low, and brace for whatever ruling comes, knowing every accusation is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's justice isn't handing out second chances. You're slumped against a mud brick wall in Persepolis, your body racked with chills despite the lingering heat. As a fever takes hold and you face the grim reality of ancient medical care. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're sick maybe from the dodgy stew in section 5 or the minty water you chugged. And the Empire's remedies are as likely to finish you off as cure you. The air's thick with the scent of dust and faint herbs, and you're clutching your backpack, wishing for a pharmacy. But all you've got is a local healer eyeing you like a puzzle she's not sure she wants to solve. Mainstream history tells, US Achaemenid medicine was a mix of herbal knowledge and ritual, with healers using plants like myrrh and prayers to Ahura Mazda to treat ailments. You're not a noble with access to the king's physicians. You're just you, shivering in a back alley, while the healer mutters and hands you a clay cup of bitter willow bark tea. It's supposed to break the fever, but it tastes like boiled twigs, and you're gagging. Your stomach already fragile from the market's food risks. You're wishing for an ibuprofen, but here, it's herbs or nothing, and you're not optimistic about your odds. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian healers burned frankincense to purify the air around sick people, believing it chased off evil spirits. The healer's waving a smoldering bundle now, the smoke stinging your eyes, and you joke to yourself that you'd rather have a cough drop than this ancient aromatherapy. It's a weak laugh, but it fades as you cough, each rasp making you wonder if you caught something worse than a cold. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual in section 6, where purity was everything. Now, you're hoping this smoke counts as holy, because you're feeling anything but pure. Historians still argue whether Persian medicine was effective or mostly superstition. Some say their herbal remedies laid the groundwork for later science, while others think the reliance on prayers and incense left patients like you at the mercy of luck. You're leaning toward luck as the tea churns your gut, and the healer's chanting doesn't exactly inspire confidence. The desert heat from section 3 already weakened you, and the legal mess in section 10 left you stressed perfect. Conditions for getting sick. You're tempted to curl up and sleep it off. But you know passing out in an alley isn't a winning survival strategy. You're trying to stay calm, watching the healer crush garlic into a paste, which she's on your wrist, claiming it'll draw out the bad humors. You're not sure what that means, but you let her, too woozy to argue. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll smell so bad, the fever will flee in self-defense. It's a delirious chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a cold, it's a survival threat, and your modern immune system's no match for ancient bugs. You're starting to respect the Persians' resilience, surviving with these remedies. While you're one bad herb away from disaster, The medical nightmare ties into your survival spiral. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't explain your symptoms, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you a low-priority patient. You think back to the market bartering in Section 8, where you couldn't afford much, and the clothing trap in Section 9, which left you sweating and vulnerable. You're wishing for a hospital bed, but you're stuck, and every cough feels like a countdown. The social hierarchy from Section 4 means no one's rushing to save a nobody like you. And you're starting to see why the Empire's people are so tough they've had to be dot as the healer wraps your wrist in a cloth. You sip more tea, wincing. At the taste, a passerby glances at you, maybe pitying your pathetic state, but keeps walking. You're not sure if you'll recover or crash, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, try to breathe through the smoke, and brace for whatever this healer throws at you next. Knowing every remedy is another roll of the dice in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's medicine cabinet isn't exactly stocked with miracles. You're staggering through Persepolis streets, your fever barely dulled by the healer's bitter tea, when a burly soldier grabs your arm, his eyes narrowing at your shaky frame. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the chilling threat of military conscription, where your weakness is no excuse. And the Empire's army doesn't take "I'm sick" for an answer. The air's thick with the scent of leather and sweat, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to look less like a recruit. But the soldier's grip says you're already on the shortlist for the king's war machine. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire fielded massive armies, drawing men from across its territories, often through forced levies, to bolster campaigns against Greeks or rebels. You're not a local, but your presence in the city looking vaguely able-bodied despite your fever makes you fair game. The soldiers barking orders in Old Persian, and your language barrier from Section 2 turns his words into a menacing blur. He's pointing toward a group of men being herded like goats, their faces grim, and you're realizing you could be dragged off to march, fight or die for an empire you don't even understand. You're wishing for a doctor's note, but here, it's serve or suffer. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some conscripts were given a single pomegranate, as a symbolic welcome to the army, a gesture you'd find cute if it weren't so terrifying. You're imagining biting into one now, seeds and all. And you joke to yourself that it'd be your last meal before you're handed a spear you don't know how to use. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the soldier shoves you forward, his spear glinting like a bad omen. You think back to the medical nightmare in Section 11, where you barely survived the healer's garlic paste. Now, you're wondering if you'll survive a battlefield with worse odds. Historians still argue whether conscription was a unifying force or a source of resentment in the empire. Some say it built loyalty among diverse peoples, while others think it alienated men like you not exactly like you. Since you're an outsider from Section 1 with zero stake in Persia's wars, you're leaning toward resentment as you stumble, your fever making every step a wobble, and the soldier's impatience feels like a prelude to a draft notice. The social hierarchy from Section 4 means you're a nobody, easily expendable, and the desert heat from Section 3 left you too weak to run. You're tempted to fake a collapse, but you know that might just get you kicked instead. You're trying to think fast, mimicking a local man nearby who's bowing low to the soldier, hoping deference buys you time. The man glances at you, maybe pitying your pathetic attempt, and you offer a weak nod, praying it's not a conscription faux pas. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll volunteer as the army's water boy and hide behind a camel. It's a delirious chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a misunderstanding. It's a survival threat, and you're one push away from a forced march to who, knows, where. The conscription threat ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't talk your way out, and your outsider status makes you an easy target for the Empire's needs. You think back to the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were voiceless, and the market bartering in Section 8, where you were outmatched. This soldier's another hurdle, and you're stumbling. Your modern instincts useless against ancient warfare's demands. You're wishing for a draft dodge manual, but you're stuck. And every shove feels like a step closer to a battlefield you're not equipped for. As the soldier drags you toward the group, a scribe nearby scribbles on a tablet, maybe noting your recruitment. You try a desperate move, pointing at your chest and coughing dramatically, hoping your fever's an out. The soldier pauses, but his scowl says he's not buying it yet. You're still sick, still terrified, but you're not giving up. You adjust. Your robe from Section 9, keep coughing, and brace for whatever comes next, knowing every moment is another test in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's army isn't looking for volunteers, it's looking for bodies. You're crouching in a dim alley off Persepolis Main Street, your fever still simmering and your robe itching as you grapple with the Empire's primitive sanitation practices. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're desperate for a clean place to relieve yourself or wash the grime off your hands. But the reality of ancient hygiene is hitting you like a bad smell. The air's thick with the stench of refuse and stale water, and you're clutching your backpack, searching for a spot that won't make you gag. You're learning fast that staying clean here is a survival challenge, and your modern germaphobe instincts are screaming. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire had basic sanitation, with some cities using open ditches for waste and canots for fresh water. But personal hygiene was a far cry from modern standards. You're staring at a muddy trench nearby, buzzing with flies, and realizing it's the closest thing to a public latrine. Washing means dipping your hands in a communal clay basin, probably shared by half the market, and you're wincing, remembering the dodgy stew from Section 5 that already wrecked your stomach. You're wishing for a bottle of hand sanitizer, but here, it's just you, the ditch, and a whole lot of regret. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians sometimes used a mix of ash and water as a crude soap, believing it purified the skin in line. With Zoroastrian cleanliness rules, you're offered a handful of this gritty paste by a woman washing nearby, and you joke to yourself that it's the ancient equivalent of a spa treatment to septic feels, like rubbing sandpaper on your hands. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you smear it on, the ash stinging your feverish skin from Section 11. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual in Section 6, where purity was everything. Now, you're wondering if this ash counts, because you feel anything but clean. Historians still argue whether Persian sanitation was advanced for its time or a health disaster waiting to happen. Some say canots and bathhouses showed ingenuity, while others point to widespread waterborne diseases that hit outsiders like you hardest. You're leaning toward disaster as you sidestep a pile of something unmentionable, your stomach churning at the thought of what's in that basin. The gender roles from Section 13 AD, pressure public washings segregated, and you're not sure if you're in the right spot, risking another social blunder. You're tempted to skip hygiene altogether, but you know that's a one-way ticket to worse illness. You're trying to adapt, watching a local man rinse his hands with practiced ease, unbothered by the basin's mud. You mimic him, dipping your fingers and scrubbing with the ash. But you're cringing, imagining the germs having a party on your skin. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian hygiene hacks, vlog, and warn everyone about the ditch of doom. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from bolting as you realize this isn't just gross, it's a survival threat. With every splash a potential infection in a body already weakened by fever and bad food. The sanitation struggle ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't ask where a cleaner spot is, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you a target for dirty looks if you linger too long. You think back to the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were voiceless, and the conscription scare in Section 12, where you were powerless. This hygiene nightmare's another hurdle, and you're stumbling. Your modern cleanliness obsession useless in a world where clean is relative. You're wishing for a hot shower, but you're stuck, and every whiff feels like a reminder you're out of your depth as you shake off the ash. A kid nearby splashes in the basin, giggling like it's a water park, and you envy his blissful ignorance. You give a weak smile, hoping it's polite, but your gut says you're still a walking germ magnet. You're not sure if you'll stay healthy, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, tuck your hands under your arms, and head back to the street, bracing for the next hygiene horror. Knowing every unclean moment is another test in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's sanitation isn't doing you any favors. You're weaving through Persepolis' bustling market, the stench of the sanitation ditch still lingering in your nose. When you reach into your backpack for something to barter and realize you're clueless about the Empire's currency. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're grappling with a confusing system of coins, weights, and trade goods, where your modern cash is as useless as a paperweight. The air's thick with the scent of cumin and clinking metal, and you're holding a shiny quarter, hoping it passes for something valuable, but the merchant's scowl says, you're way off base. You're learning fast that money here is a survival puzzle, and you're missing half the pieces. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire pioneered one of the first coin systems, with gold darics and silver sigloi stamped with the king's image, but bartering with goods like barley or copper was still common. You're staring at a vendor's stall, where he's weighing lumps of silver on a balanced scale, and you're trying to offer your quarter, but he's laughing like you've handed him a pebble. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't ask how much a jug of water costs, and your fever from Section 11's medical ordeal has you too woozy to haggle like you tried in Section 8. You're wishing for an ATM, but here it's coins or bust, and you're busted. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians used sealed clay purses to store coins, breaking them open to spend the contents, like an ancient piggy bank. You're imagining smashing one for a sip of water, and you joke to yourself that you'd probably break your hand instead and end up owing the vendor for the mess. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as he waves you off, pointing at a pile of barley you don't have. You think back to the sanitation nightmare in Section 14, where you couldn't even wash properly. Now, you're realizing you can't buy a clean drink either, and your parched throat's not amused. Historians still argue whether the Empire's currency system streamlined trade or created chaos for outsiders like you. Some say coins standardized wealth, while others think the mix of coins, weights, and bartering confused foreigners, leaving them easy prey for scams. You're leaning toward chaos as another merchant offers you a tiny silver siglos for your entire backpack. A deal that feels like highway robbery. The social hierarchy from Section 4 marks you as a nobody, and the gender roles from Section 13 mean you're already acting wrong, drawing more skeptical eyes. You're tempted to give up and go thirsty, but you know, worse enemy than a bad trade. You're trying to learn fast, watching a local woman trade a sack of lentils for a clay pot, her gestures calm and precise. You mimic her, pointing at a small jug and offering your quarter again. But the vendor just shakes his head, muttering something sharp. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll mint your own coins with your face and call them outsider. Bucks. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from tossing your useless quarter in frustration. You're starting to respect the Persians' knack for navigating this economic maze, even if you're tripping over every turn. The currency confusion ties into your survival spiral. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate value, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you a target for rip-off. You think back to the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were voiceless, and the conscription scare in Section 12, where you were powerless. This money mess is another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern wallet useless in a world where silver's king. You're wishing for a vending machine, but you're stuck. And every failed trade feels like another nail in your 24-hour survival coffin as you fumble through another attempt, pulling a pen from your backpack as a last-ditch. Barter. A kid nearby snickers, probably betting on your next flop. The vendor pauses, eyeing the pen, but his counter-offers a torrent of words you don't catch. You're still broke, still lost, but you're not quitting. You adjust your robe from Section 9, grip the pen like it's gold, and brace for the next round, knowing every trade is a step closer to survival law. Another lesson in how the Empire's economy chews up outsiders like you. You're slinking through Persepolis' crowded streets, your failed barter for water leaving you parched and your fever still simmering, when you notice a pair of men in plain robes watching you a little too closely. As an outsider in the Empire, you're suddenly aware of the Empire's spies. Their eyes everywhere, marking you as a potential threat just for existing. The air's thick with the scent of roasting sesame and tension, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to look harmless, but your weird clothes and fumbling ways are screaming suspicious. You're learning fast that survival means dodging the Empire's paranoia, and you're already on their radar. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire employed a network of spies, known as the King's Eyes and Ears, to monitor loyalty and sniff out rebellion across its vast territories. You're not a rebel, just a feverish nobody from Section 1, but your language barrier from Section 2 and odd behavior, like offering a quarter in Section 15, make you look like trouble. The men are lingering near a stall, pretending to inspect figs, but their glances keep flicking your way, and you're starting to sweat more than the desert heat from Section 3 warrants. You're wishing for a not a spy sign, but here, suspicion's a death sentence, and you're radiating it. Here's a quirky tidbit. Spies sometimes used coded messages scratched on clay tablets, hidden under mundane lists of grain or wool. You're imagining yourself accidentally buying one and triggering a manhunt, and you joke to yourself that you'd be the worst secret agent ever. Tripping over your robe from Section 9, it's a quick laugh, but it fades as one of the men mutters to the other, pointing subtly at your backpack. You think back to the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were accused of theft. Now, you're wondering if these spies think you're plotting something worse, and your heart's racing. Historians still argue whether the spy network kept the empire secure or bred fear and mistrust among its people. Some say it ensured stability, while others think it alienated outsiders like you, making every stranger a suspect. You're leaning toward fear as you try to blend into the crowd, keeping your head down like you learned in the gender roles. Mess of Section 13. The social hierarchy from Section 4 marks you as a nobody, and your fever from Section 11 makes you look shifty, swaying as you walk. You're tempted to bolt, but you know running would confirm their suspicions. And you're not ready for a dungeon tour. You're trying to act natural, mimicking a local man who's haggling calmly nearby. But your hands are shaking, and your backpack's strap slips, drawing another glance from the spies. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll offer them your pen from Section 15 and claim it's a spy gadget. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just paranoia. It's a survival threat. With every move you make potentially landing you in chains, you're starting to respect the Persians' vigilance, even if it's aimed at you. A clueless outsider who can't even barter for water, the spy threat ties into your survival spiral. Your language barrier means you can't explain yourself, and your outsider status makes you an easy target for scrutiny. You think back to the Zoroastrian ritual in Section 6, where you fumbled through piety, and the conscription scare in Section 12, where you were nearly dragged off. This surveillance is another hurdle, and you're stumbling. Your modern instincts useless against the Empire's watchful eyes. You're wishing for a cloak of invisibility, but you're stuck. And every glance feels like a step closer to trouble in a world that doesn't trust strangers. As you shuffle past the stall, one of the men steps closer, his hand resting on a dagger at his belt. You try a desperate move, giving a low bow like you saw in the market, hoping it screams harmless tourist. He pauses, but his eyes don't soften, and you're not sure if you've bought time or just delayed the inevitable. You're still watched, still vulnerable, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, keep your gaze down, and slip into the crowd, bracing for the next shadow on your tail. Knowing every step is a test in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's spies aren't here to make friends. You're ducking out of Persepolis Market, the spy's eyes still burning into your back, when a gruff overseer shoves a heavy basket of barley into your arms, barking orders you can't understand. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're roped into grueling manual labor, your fever and exhaustion no excuse in a world that demands everyone pull their weight. The air's thick with grain, dust, and the tang of sweat, and you're staggering under the load, your backpack, bouncing awkwardly. You're learning fast that survival means toiling without question, and your modern desk job stamina is laughably outmatched. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire relied on a vast labor force, from farmers to builders, often conscripting, locals and foreigners alike for projects like palaces or canals. You're not carving reliefs for Darius, but you're stuck hauling barley to a granary, your arms screaming with every step. The overseer's waving a stick, his old Persian commands lost on you thanks to your language barrier from Section 2. And you're just nodding, hoping it's the right response. You're wishing for a coffee break, but here, it's work or face a lash. And you're already too weak from the fever in Section 11 to risk defiance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some laborers were paid in rations, like a daily jug of beer made from fermented barley. You're imagining chugging one now, fever be damned. And you joke to yourself that it'd probably taste better than the willow bark tea from Section 11's medical fiasco. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you trip, spilling a handful of grain, and the overseer's glare could curdle milk. You think back to the spies in Section 16, who marked you as suspicious. Now, you're wondering if slacking off will land you in worse trouble, like a one-way trip to a quarry. Historians still argue whether the Empire's labor system was efficient or exploitative. Some say it built marvels like Persepolis, while others think it ground down workers, especially outsiders like you with no rights. You're leaning toward exploitative as your back aches and the basket straps dig into your shoulders. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and the gender roles from Section 13 mean you're expected to keep up, no matter how you're presenting. You're tempted to drop the basket and run, but the desert heat from Section 3 taught you there's nowhere to go, and the spies are probably still watching. You're trying to keep pace, mimicking a wiry man nearby who's hauling his own load with grim determination. He glances at you, maybe pitying your clumsy struggle, and you offer a weak nod, hoping it's not a labor faux pas. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll pitch a Persian workout plan back home, featuring barley lifting and overseer. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from collapsing as you realize this isn't just hard work, it's a survival test. And your modern fitness routine of occasional yoga isn't cutting it in this ancient grind. The labor demands tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate a lighter load, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you an easy target for the overseer's wrath. You think back to the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were voiceless, and the currency confusion in Section 15, where you couldn't buy relief. This forced work is another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your feverish body begging for rest in a world that doesn't care. You're wishing for a union rep, but you're stuck, and every grain you spill feels like a step closer to punishment. As you reach the granary, the overseer barks again, pointing to a pile where you're supposed to dump your load. You try a desperate move, setting the basket down slowly to catch your breath, but his stick taps your shoulder, and you're back at it, heart pounding. You're still sick, still exhausted, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe from Section 9, wipe the sweat from your brow, and brace for the next load, knowing every task is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's labor machine doesn't stop for anyone, especially not you. You're trudging back from the granary, your arms aching from hauling barley and your fever still gnawing at your strength, when you stumble into a chaotic scene of snorting camels and growling dogs near Persepolis outskirts. As an outsider, in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the unpredictable risks of animal encounters, where beasts of burden and wild creatures don't care about your survival odds. The air's thick with the musky stench of livestock and dry grass, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to dodge a camel's swinging head. But you're learning fast that animals here are as dangerous as the spies or overseers you've dodged. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire relied heavily on camels for trade caravans, horses for armies, and dogs for guarding or hunting. You're not a herder or a soldier, just a feverish stranger caught in a dusty corral where a trader's camels are unloading sacks of wool. One of them spits a glob of saliva your way, narrowly missing your robe, and you're flinching, your heart racing as a stray dog barks nearby, its teeth bared. You're wishing for a pet store's calm, but here, animals are half wild, and you're in their territory with no clue how to handle them. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians sometimes used trained falcons to hunt small game, a skill you're definitely not equipped for, but you're imagining a falcon swooping to save you from this camel's bad attitude. You joke to yourself that you'd trade your backpack for a falcon whisperer to clear your path. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the camel lurches, nearly knocking you flat, and the dog's growl gets closer. You think back to the labor grind in section 17, where you were already pushed to your limit. Now, you're wondering if you'll survive a stampede before the overseer drags you back to work. Historians still argue whether animals were a boon or a hazard in the Empire's daily life. Some say they powered trade and warfare, while others point to frequent accidents, like camel kicks or dog bites, that endangered people like you, untrained and out of place. You are leaning toward hazard as you sidestep another camel, your fever from section 11 making your reflexes sluggish. The social hierarchy from section 4 means no one's rushing to help a nobody like you, and your language barrier from section 2 stops you from shouting for assistance. You're tempted to freeze, but you know standing still might make you a target for that snarling dog. You're trying to stay calm, watching a local boy nearby who's tossing grain to calm the camels, his movements quick and sure. You mimic him, stepping slowly, but your sneakers squeak, and the dog lunges, snapping at your ankle before a trader yanks it back. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian animal survival guide and list don't wear squeaky shoes as rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from bolting as you realize this isn't just chaos, it's a survival test, and your modern petting zoo experience is no match for these beasts. The animal risks tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't ask for help, and your outsider status from section 1 makes you a low-priority victim if things go south. You think back to the spies in section 16 who marked you as suspicious, and the sanitation nightmare in section 14 where you dodged disease. This corrals another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your feverish body no match for a camel's kick or a dog's bite. You're wishing for a leash or a tranquilizer dart, but you're stuck, and every growl feels like a reminder you're out of your league. As you edge toward the corral's exit, the trader shouts something, maybe a warning, but you just nod, hoping it's enough. The dog's still eyeing you, and a camel swings its head, but you're almost clear. You're not sure if you'll avoid another encounter, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe from section 9, keep your eyes on the path, and brace for the next beastly surprise, knowing every snarl is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's animals aren't here to make your day easier. You're staggering away from the corral, the camel's spit still drying on your robe and your fever pulsing, when you stumble into a vibrant festival scene in Persepolis Main Square, alive with music and the scent of blooming jasmine. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're sidelined during this celebration, likely Nowruz, the Persian New Year, but the strict rules of participation make you feel like a ghost in the crowd. The air hums with lutes and laughter, but you're clutching your backpack, trying to blend in, only to realize you're excluded by customs you don't grasp. You're learning fast that survival means navigating this festive trap without stepping on sacred toes. Mainstream history tells us Nowruz was a major Achaemenid festival, marking spring with feasts, gift-giving, and rituals to honor Ahura Mazda, uniting the empire's diverse peoples. You're watching locals dance around bonfires, tossing barley into flames like you saw in the Zoroastrian ritual from section 6, but you're not invited to join. Your gender roles from section 13 mean you're expected to stay on the fringes and lead the public rites, while women, if present, are veiled and quiet in separate areas. Your language barrier from section 2 keeps you from asking what's happening, and you're wishing for a festival flyer, but here, You're an uninvited guest, and the crowd's joy feels like a wall. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes 8 sprouted lentils as a symbol of renewal, served with honey for luck. You're eyeing a platter nearby, your stomach growling despite the dodgy stew from Section 5, and you joke to yourself that you'd trade your backpack for a bite, though you'd probably choke on the symbolism. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as a man shoves past, muttering something sharp, likely annoyed you're loitering where you don't belong. You think back to the animal chaos in Section 18, where you dodged a camel. Now, you're dodging social exclusion, and it's just as disorienting. Historians still argue whether festivals like Nowruz fostered unity or highlighted divisions in the empire. Some say they brought people together, while others think they reinforced hierarchies, excluding outsiders like you from the heart of the celebration. You're leaning toward divisions as you try to edge closer to the fire, only to be waved off by a woman enforcing the women's section. The social hierarchy from Section 4 marks you as a nobody, and your fever from Section 11 makes you look like a wobbly intruder. You're tempted to slip away, but the music's pull and your hunger keep you hovering, risking another misstep. You're trying to blend in, mimicking a local's low bow to a passing elder, but your backpack bumps someone, and you earn a scowl that screams outsider louder than your robe from Section 9. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a festival fails. Scroll and list, don't bring a backpack as rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from retreating as you realize this isn't just a party, it's a survival test, proving you can respect sacred customs without crashing the empire's biggest bash. You're starting to admire the Persians' devotion, even if you're stuck on the sidelines. The festival's exclusion ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't join the chants, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you unwelcome in the inner circle. You think back to the spies in Section 16, who eyed you as a threat, and the labor grind in Section 17, where you toiled without choice. This celebration's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern party vibes useless in a world of rigid ritual. You're wishing for a modern block party, but you're stuck, and every sidelong glance feels like a reminder you don't belong as you linger. A kid tosses a handful of barley your way, maybe teasing, maybe inviting, but a stern adult pulls him back, and you're left holding grain you don't know what to do with. You try a weak smile, hoping it's neutral, but your gut says you're still an oddity. You're not sure if you'll ever join the dance, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, pocket the barley, and keep your distance, bracing for the next festive snub, knowing every exclusion is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's joy isn't meant for you. You're edging away from the Nowruz festival's glow, the barley in your pocket a small consolation for your exclusion, when you're swept into a grand hall by a crowd heading to a noble's banquet. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're thrust into a maze of court etiquette, where every gesture is a potential disaster, and your feverish, clumsy self is woefully unprepared. The air shimmers with the scent of myrrh and roasted lamb, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to mimic the locals' graceful bows. But you're learning fast that survival means mastering a dance of manners you've never rehearsed. Mainstream history tells us Achaemenid nobles hosted lavish banquets to flaunt wealth and loyalty to the king, with strict protocols governing who sits where, who speaks, and how to sip from a golden cup. You're not a satrap or even a local, just a feverish nobody from Section 1 who got dragged in by mistake, Maybe because your robe from Section 9 passes for decent. You're standing awkwardly near a low table, surrounded by men in embroidered tunics and women with coal-lined eyes, all moving like they've memorized a script. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't catch the whispered cues, and you're wishing for a modern dinner invite with zero stakes. But here, one wrong move could brand you a barbarian. Here's a quirky tidbit. Guests sometimes brought their own napkins to banquets, a status symbol woven with intricate patterns. You're napkinless, wiping your sweaty hands on your robe, and you joke to yourself that you'd trade your backpack for a fancy cloth to wave like a pro. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as a servant offers you a cup of wine, and you fumble the ritual toast, spilling a drop and earning a gasp from a nearby noble. You think back to the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you were sidelined. Now, you're center stage, and the spotlight's unforgiving. Historians still argue whether court etiquette unified the empire's elite or alienated those who couldn't keep up, like you. Some say it reinforced loyalty, while others think it was a trap for outsiders, exposing their ignorance. You're leaning toward trap as you try to sit cross-legged like the others, your knees cracking loud enough to draw smirks. The social hierarchy from Section 4 puts you at the bottom, and your fever from Section 11 makes you sway, risking a faceplant into the lamb. You're tempted to fake a cough and flee, but the guards at the door look ready to pounce. And you're still dodging spies from Section 16. You're trying to blend in, watching a woman nearby sip her wine with delicate precision, her veil barely shifting. You mimic her, lifting your cup slowly, but your hand shakes, and you nearly spill again. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian banquet blunders. Scroll and list don't tremble as Rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a meal, it's a survival test, proving you can play noble without crashing their party. You're starting to respect the Persians' poise. Even if you're a walking etiquette disaster, the court maze ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't follow the toasts, and your outsider status makes you a target. For scorn, you think back to the labor grind in Section 17, where you toiled without choice, and the animal chaos in Section 18, where you dodged a camel's spit. This banquet's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern casual vibes useless in a world of rigid decorum. You're wishing for a fast food drive-through, but you're stuck, and every clink of your cup feels like a gamble in a room full of judges. As a noble rises to speak, you try a desperate move, bowing low like you saw in the market, hoping it covers your latest fumble. He pauses, eyeing you, and you're not sure if you've passed or just delayed the inevitable snub. You're still feverish, still out of place, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, grip your cup tighter, and brace for the next etiquette trap, knowing every misstep is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's elite aren't here to coach you through. You're slipping out of the noble's banquet, your feverish head spinning from the etiquette maze, when a stern official in a tasseled robe corners you, demanding tribute in the form of silver or goods. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're hit with the crushing weight of taxation, a system that squeezes everyone, especially nobodies like you with nothing to offer. The air's thick with the scent of cedar smoke and the official's impatience, and you're clutching your backpack, fumbling for anything to satisfy him, but your modern trinkets are worthless. You're learning fast that survival means paying up, and you're flat broke in this empire's tax game. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire ran on a sophisticated tax system, with satraps collecting tribute in gold, silver, grain, or labor to fund palaces and armies. You're not a landowner or merchant, just a feverish stranger from Section 1, but that doesn't exempt you. The officials waving a clay tablet, probably a tally of what you owe. And your language barrier from Section 2 turns his demands into a menacing jumble. You're trying to gesture that you're penniless, but his scowl deepens, and you're wishing for a tax app to make this vanish. But here, it's pay or face consequences, maybe even a dungeon. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some taxes were paid in exotic goods, like ostrich eggs or ivory from far-off provinces. You're imagining offering your pen from Section 15 as a rare foreign artifact, and you joke to yourself that you'd be lucky if he didn't chuck it at your head. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as he taps his staff, pointing at your backpack like it's tribute material. You think back to the banquet in Section 20, where you barely survived the etiquette traps. Now, you're wondering if failing to pay up will land you in worse trouble, like the legal dispute in Section 10. Historians still argue whether the empire's tax system was efficient or oppressive. Some say it fueled grandeur, like Persepolis, while others think it burdened the poor and outsiders like you, sparking resentment. You're leaning toward oppressive as you fumble through your backpack, pulling out a keychain that earns a sneer. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody. And your fever from Section 11 leaves you too shaky to look convincing. You're tempted to bolt, but the officials' guards are nearby. And you know running's a one-way ticket to a cell, especially with spies watching from Section 16. You're trying to think fast, mimicking a local man nearby who's handing over a small sack of barley with a low bow. You offer your keychain with a similar gesture, hoping it buys time, but the official snorts, clearly unimpressed. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian tax evasion. Scroll and list don't offer shiny junk as rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a shakedown, it's a survival test, and your empty pockets are failing you in a world where tribute's the price of staying free. The taxation burden ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate, and your outsider status makes you an easy mark for demands. You think back to the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you were sidelined, and the labor grind in Section 17, where you toiled without pay. This tax demands another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern wallet useless in a world of silver and submission. You're wishing for a tax loophole, but you're stuck, and every demand feels like a step closer to punishment in an empire that doesn't care about your excuses. As the official scribbles on his tablet, you try a desperate move, pulling out your pen again, spinning it like it's a treasure. He pauses, eyeing it, but his grunt says it's not enough, and he gestures for more. You're still broke, still feverish, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe from Section 9, shove the keychain back in your pack, and brace for his next demand, knowing every empty-handed moment is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint, and the Empire's taxman isn't here to cut you slack. You're backing away from the tax official, your pen and keychain rejected, your fever still simmering when you realize you need to send a message, maybe a plea for help, but you're stuck in the Achaemenid Empire's sluggish communication system. As an outsider, you're grappling with the delays of relaying information across this vast empire, where your urgent need is at the mercy of couriers and clay tablets. The air's thick with the scent of dust and distant cooking fires, and you're clutching your backpack, hoping to find someone to carry your words. But you're learning fast that survival means waiting, and you don't have time to spare. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire had an impressive postal system, with couriers on the royal road relaying messages between stations, covering hundreds of miles in days. But you're not a satrap sending royal orders. You're a nobody from Section 1, trying to scribble a note on a scrap of cloth with your pen from Section 15. Your language barrier from Section 2 means you can't explain your message to the courier you're eyeing, and your shaky hand thanks. To the fever from Section 11 makes your writing look like a toddler's doodle. You're wishing for a text message, but here, it's tablets and horses, and you're stuck at the starting line. Here's a quirky tidbit. Couriers sometimes carried sealed clay envelopes baked to protect the tablet inside, like an ancient version of express mail. You're imagining your cloth scrap in one of those, and you joke to yourself that it'd probably get lost in transit and end up in Babylon as a coaster. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the courier, a wiry man with a bored expression, glances at you and keeps walking. You think back to the tax demand in Section 21, where you had nothing to give. Now, you're realizing you can't even afford a courier's fee, and your plea's going nowhere fast. Historians still argue whether the Empire's communication system was a marvel or a bottleneck for non-elites like you. Some say it knit the Empire together, while others think it prioritized royal messages, leaving commoners and outsiders waiting weeks for replies. You're leaning toward bottleneck as you wave your cloth at another courier, who ignores you, probably because you look like a feverish mess in your robe from Section 9. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you invisible, and the spies from Section 16 might be watching, ready to misread your note as a plot. You're tempted to give up, but you know silence could mean no help, and you're running out of options. You're trying to adapt, watching a local man hand a tablet to a courier with a low bow and a silver coin. You mimic the bow, holding out your cloth, but your empty pockets earn a scoff, and you're back to square one. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian Pony Express and deliver your own mail on foot. In this heat, it's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from despair as you realize this isn't just a delay, it's a survival threat, with every unsent message leaving you more isolated in a world that doesn't care about your urgency. The communication delays tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate with couriers, and your outsider status makes you a low priority sender. You think back to the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you were sidelined, and the labor grind in Section 17, where you toiled without reward. This message mess is another hurdle, and you're stumbling. Your modern instant messaging habits useless in a world of hooves and clay. You're wishing for a carrier pigeon, but you're stuck, and every ignored wave feels like a step closer to being stranded. As you tuck the cloth back into your backpack, a kid nearby snickers, probably amused by your futile flailing. You try a desperate move, offering your pen as a bribe, but the next courier just shrugs, already galloping off. You're still unheard, still feverish, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, grip your backpack tighter, and scan for another courier, bracing for the next snub, knowing every delay is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's communication lines aren't built for outsiders like you. You're trudging back toward Persepolis Center, your unsent message crumpled in your backpack and your fever dragging at your steps, when you're directed to a cramped mud brick house for shelter, only to find it's a sweltering, uncomfortable, Box. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're grappling with the harsh reality of ancient housing, where even a roof over your head feels like a survival challenge. The air's thick with the scent of stale straw and smoke, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to make sense of this dim, stuffy space. But you're learning fast that comfort's a luxury you won't find here. Mainstream history tells. US Achaemenid commoners lived in simple mud brick homes, often 1 or 2 rooms with flat roofs, packed with families and minimal furnishings. You're not a noble with a palace suite. You're stuck in a lone corner of a family's house, where a thin mat on the dirt floor is your bed. The walls are cracked, letting in drafts and bugs, and the single windows, more for air than light, making the room feel like a low-budget sauna. Your fever from Section 11 makes the heat unbearable, and you're wishing for a fan or even a proper mattress, but here, it's straw or nothing. And you're already itching. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian homes had small clay stoves for cooking, fueled by dried dung, which explains the faint earthy whiff you're gagging on. You're imagining trying to sleep next to one, and you joke to yourself that you'd rather camp in the desert from Section 3 than inhale this all night. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as a roach scuttles across the floor, and you flinch, your nerves frayed from the courier snub in Section 22. You think back to the sanitation nightmare in Section 14, where cleanliness was a dream. Now, you're realizing home isn't much better, and your germaphobe soul is screaming. Historians still argue whether Persian housing was practical for the climate or a health hazard for dwellers like you. Some say mud brick kept homes cool, while others point to poor ventilation and vermin that spread disease, especially to outsiders with weak immune systems. You're leaning toward hazard as you swat at a mosquito, your fever spiking in the stuffy air. The social hierarchy from Section 4 means you're lucky to even get this mat, and your language barrier from Section 2 stops you from asking for a better spot. You're tempted to sleep outside, but the spies from Section 16 might spot you. And you're not keen on another interrogation. You're trying to adapt, watching a family member nearby roll out their own mat with calm resignation. You mimic them, spreading your mat and sitting cross-legged, but the straw pokes through and you're wincing like you're on a bed of nails. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll pitch a Persian Airbnb review and give this place 0 stars for roach roommates. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from bolting as you realize this isn't just uncomfortable, it's a survival test. With every itch and wheeze threatening your already shaky health in a world that doesn't prioritize your comfort, the housing discomforts tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate for a better spot, and your outsider status from Section 1 makes you a grudging guest. You think back to the tax demand in Section 21, where you had nothing to give, and the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you were sidelined. This cramped house is another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern love of cozy beds useless in a world of straw and bugs. You're wishing for a hotel, but you're stuck, and every creak feels like a reminder you're barely holding on. As you settle onto the mat, a kid in the corner stares, maybe curious about your weird backpack. You try a weak smile, hoping it's polite, but your gut says you're still an oddity. You're not sure if you'll rest or just survive the night, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe from Section 9, tuck your backpack under your head, and brace for the next discomfort, knowing every restless moment is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's homes aren't built for outsiders like you. You're tossing on your straw mat in the cramped mud brick house, the roach parade and fever keeping sleep at bay, when you overhear whispers outside about your odd behavior and strange backpack. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're caught in the trap of social gossip, where every move you make is fodder for judgment, threatening your already shaky status. The air's thick with the scent of cooling earth and stale dunk smoke, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to stay quiet. But you're learning fast that survival means dodging the Empire's rumor mill, and you're already its favorite. Mainstream history tells us Achaemenid society was tightly knit, with gossip serving as a social glue and a weapon to enforce norms and spot troublemakers. You're not a rebel, just a feverish nobody from Section 1. But your language barrier from Section 2, weird robe fumbling from Section 9, and failed bartering in Section 15 have painted you as that strange foreigner. You're catching snippets of old Persian through the wall, your name's not mentioned, but words like spy and fool sound suspiciously aimed at you. You're wishing for noise-cancelling headphones, but here, whispers are louder than shouts, and you're the star of a scandal you didn't audition for. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians spread gossip by scratching subtle insults on pottery shards, passed around like ancient post-it notes. You're imagining one with your face sketched next to a camel, captioned "Clueless, Outsider," and you joke to yourself that you'd frame it if you weren't so busy sweating through your fever from Section 11. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the whispers grow sharper, and you realize this isn't just chatter, could get you shunned or worse. Like the legal dispute in Section 10, where you were accused of theft. You're starting to feel like a reality show contestant. Everyone's voting off. Historians still argue whether gossip strengthened community bonds or tore them apart by targeting outsiders like you. Some say it kept order, while others think it fueled mistrust, especially for those who didn't fit the mold. You're leaning toward mistrust as you shift on the mat, trying not to creak and add fuel to the rumor fire. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and the gender roles from Section 13 mean your every move, to bold or to shy, is wrong. You're tempted to confront the whisperers, but you know that it only confirmed their suspicions, especially with spies from Section 16 still lurking. You're trying to stay invisible, mimicking the silence of a family member sleeping nearby. Their steady breaths a contrast to your racing pulse. You overhear a woman's voice, maybe the house's matriarch, muttering about your useless trinkets. Probably your pen from Section 15. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a gossip survival guide and list "don't bring shiny pens" as Rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just talk, it's a survival threat. With every rumor eroding your chances of blending in a world that's quick to judge. The gossip trap ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't defend yourself, and your outsider status makes you an easy target for tales. You think back to the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you were sidelined, and the housing discomforts in Section 23, where you were barely tolerated. This rumor mill's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern chill vibe useless. In a world where whispers carry weight, you're wishing for a social media blackout, but you're stuck, and every murmur feels like a step closer to trouble in an empire that thrives on scrutiny. As the whispers quiet, you lie still, hoping. The gossip fades with the night. A kid in the house coughs, breaking the silence, and you seize the moment to shift, easing the mat's straw jabs. You're not sure if you'll escape the rumors, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, tuck your backpack closer, and brace for the next whisper, knowing every judgment is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's gossip isn't here to give you a fair trial. You're stumbling away from the fire altar, the priest's skeptical glare still burning in your mind, when you decide to flee Persepolis, suffocating scrutiny, and hit the royal road, hoping for a quieter village. As an outsider in the Empire, you're now caught in the heart-pounding terror of a bandit ambush, a roadside robbery attempt that turns your shaky escape into a fight for survival. The air's thick with the scent of dry scrub and fear, and you're clutching your backpack, your feverish legs wobbling as three shadowed figures with curved blades block your path. You're learning fast that the Empire's roads are a bandit's playground, and you're the easiest target they've seen all day. Mainstream history tells us the Royal Road, while a marvel of connectivity, was plagued by bandits preying on travelers, especially those without armed escorts or royal seals. You're not a merchant with guards. You're a feverish nobody from Section 1, your robe from Section 9 flapping like a flag that screams, "Rob me." The bandits are shouting in Old Persian, and your language barrier from Section 2 turns their threats into a menacing hum. But their drawn knives need no translation. You're trying to raise your hands in surrender, but your backpack's weight pulls you off balance, and you're wishing for a modern 911 call, but here, it's you against the blades, and the odds aren't pretty. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some travelers carried hidden pouches sewn into their robes to stash valuables from bandits. You're patting your empty robe now, wishing you'd stashed your pen from Section 15 somewhere clever, and you joke to yourself that you'd offer them your fever as a gift if it'd make them back off. It's a quick laugh, but it fades, as one bandit steps closer, his blade glinting in the dusk. And you realize this isn't just a shakedown, it's a survival test. And your shaky state from Section 11's fever makes you an easy mark. You think back to the purity test in Section 25, where you barely passed. Now, you're praying Ahura Mazda's got a bandit repelling trick up his sleeve. Historians still argue whether the Empire's patrols kept the royal road safe or left gaps for bandits to thrive. Some say Darius guards maintained order, while others think remote stretches like this were lawless, especially for outsiders like you. You're leaning toward lawless as you stumble back, tripping over a rock, and the bandits laugh, their eyes locked on your backpack. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and the gossip from Section 24 probably painted you as a rich fool, even though you're broke from Section 21's tax dodge. You're tempted to run, but your feverish legs and the desert heat from Section 3 say that's a losing bet. You're trying to think fast, mimicking a local trader you saw in Section 8, who talked his way out of a deal with calm gestures. You raise your hands slowly, pointing at your empty pockets, but one bandit grabs your backpack strap, yanking you forward. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a bandit survival guide, and list don't carry a flashy backpack as Rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from screaming as you realize this isn't just theft, it's life or death, and your modern conflict avoidance skills are no match for their knives. You're starting to respect the Persians' road savvy, grit, even if you're flunking their survival course. The bandit ambush ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't negotiate, and your outsider status makes you a prime target. You think back to the spies in Section 16, who eyed you as trouble, and the animal chaos in Section 18, where you dodged a camel's spit. This robbery's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your feverish body no match for armed thieves. You're wishing for a security guard, but you're stuck, and every glint of steel feels like a countdown to disaster in a world that doesn't protect strays. As the bandit tugs your backpack, you try a desperate move, dropping to your knees, and fake coughing like you did in Section 12's conscription scare, hoping they'll think you're too sick to rob. The leader pauses, muttering to his crew, but their knives don't lower, and you're not sure if you've bought time or just annoyed them. You're still feverish, still terrified, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, keep coughing, and brace for their next move, knowing every second is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's roads aren't forgiving to outsiders like you. You're lying awake on the straw mat, the gossip outside finally fading, but your fever's keeping you restless as you're summoned to a small fire altar at dawn for a Zoroastrian purity test. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the intense scrutiny of religious cleanliness rituals, where your shaky, sweaty state is a liability in a world obsessed with spiritual purity. The air's cool but heavy with the scent of burning cedar and ash, and you're clutching your backpack, trying to follow the priest's gestures. But you're learning fast that survival means passing a divine inspection you're doomed to fail. Mainstream history tells us Zoroastrianism demanded strict purity in the Achaemenid Empire, with rituals like washing or fire offerings to honor Ahura Mazda and ward off defilement. You're not a priest or even a devout local, just a feverish nobody from Section 1, standing before an altar where a small flame crackles like it's judging you. The priest's chanting in Old Persian, and your language barrier from Section 2 turns his instructions into a blur, leaving you to fumble through a hand-washing rite with a clay bowl of water. Your fever from Section 11 makes you tremble, splashing water, and you're wishing for a Purity for Dummies guide, but here, it's cleanse or be cast out. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Zoroastrians used urine from sacred bulls as a purifying agent in extreme rituals. Thankfully, you're just dealing with water today. You're imagining dousing yourself with that instead, and you joke to yourself that you'd rather face the camel spit from Section 18 than this bovine bath. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the priest frowns, pointing at your damp robe. From Section 9, clearly unimpressed. You think back to the gossip trap in Section 24, where whispers marked you as odd. Now, you're wondering if failing this test will brand you impure and make those rumors worse. Historians still argue whether Zoroastrian purity rules unified believers or alienated outsiders like you. Some say they fostered discipline, while others think they excluded those who couldn't keep up, especially foreigners unfamiliar with the rites. You're leaning toward alienated as you dip your hands again, trying not to spill, but your feverish shakes betray you, and a woman nearby hisses softly. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and the gender roles from Section 13 mean you're under extra scrutiny, your every move judged for propriety. You're tempted to fake a cough and flee, but the priest's stern gaze and the spies from Section 16 keep you rooted. You're trying to blend in, mimicking a local man who's washing his hands with calm precision, but your backpack bumps the altar, and the priest's glare could melt stone. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a purity test fails. Scroll and list don't bring a backpack as rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from panicking as you realize this isn't just a ritual, it's a survival test, proving you're not a spiritual threat in a world that sees impurity as dangerous. You're starting to respect the Persians' devotion, even if their rules feel like a trap for a feverish outsider like you. The purity test ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't follow the chants, and your outsider status makes you a suspect for defilement. You think back to the housing discomforts in Section 23, where you were barely tolerated, and the tax demand in Section 21, where you had nothing to give. This ritual's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern hygiene habits useless in a world of sacred water and fire. You're wishing for a quick shower to pass as pure, but you're stuck, and every splash feels like a step closer to being ostracized, as the priest sprinkles ash over the flame. You try a desperate move, bowing low like you saw at the festival in Section 19, hoping it covers your clumsy washing. He pauses, but his eyes don't soften, and you're not sure if you've passed or just delayed judgment. You're still feverish, still shaky, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, dry your hands on it, and brace for the next ritual step, knowing every misstep is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's gods aren't handing out easy blessings. You're crouched in the dust of the royal road, the bandits finally backing off after rifling through your backpack and finding nothing but your useless pen and keychain. When a local craftsman spots you and drags you to his workshop, demanding, you prove your worth with a skill. As an outsider in the Achaemenid Empire, you're facing the intense pressure to demonstrate a trade like weaving or metalwork in a world where everyone's expected to contribute something useful. The air's thick with the scent of clay and charcoal, and you're standing before a loom, your feverish hands trembling as you fumble with wool threads. You're learning fast that survival means producing, and your modern resume of good at emails is about to get you laughed out of the shop. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire thrived on skilled artisans, from potters to goldsmiths, whose crafts fueled trade and adorned palaces like Persepolis. You're not a trained weaver, just a shaky nobody from Section 1. But the craftsman's pointing at the loom, his old Persian orders lost on you thanks to your language barrier from Section 2. He's showing you how to thread the shuttle, but your fever from Section 11 makes your fingers clumsy and the wool's tangling faster than your thoughts. You're wishing for a YouTube tutorial, but here it's weave or face scorn. And you're already feeling the craftsman's impatience. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persian weavers wove tiny beads into their textiles as hidden signatures, a subtle way to claim their work. You're imagining slipping a bead into this mess and calling it art, but you joke to yourself that your masterpiece to be more modern art disaster than a market seller. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as the craftsman snaps his fingers, pointing at your knotted threads. You think back to the bandit ambush in Section 26, where you barely escaped. Now, you're wondering if failing here will make you a village outcast, like the gossip trap in Section 24 warned. Historians still argue whether the Empire's craft, culture valued skill or exploited labor, especially from outsiders like you. Some say artisans earned respect, while others think unskilled workers were mocked or pushed out, leaving foreigners scrambling. You're leaning toward mocked as you tangle the loom again, and the craftsman's sigh could power a windstorm. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and your gender roles from Section 13 mean you're expected to keep up, no excuses. You're tempted to fake a skill, but the labor grind from Section 17 showed you can't bluff your way through work, and the spies from Section 16 might still be watching. You're trying to learn, watching a young apprentice nearby, her hands gliding through the threads with ease. You mimic her, looping the yarn slowly, but it snaps, and you wince, earning a grunt from the craftsman. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll pitch a weaving for losers class and flunk with honors. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you from quitting as you realize this isn't just a task, it's a survival test, proving you're not dead weight in a world that demands utility. You're starting to respect the Persians' craft pride, even if you're a walking proof of what not to do. The craft pressure ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't ask for tips, and your outsider status makes you a target for ridicule. You think back to the tax demand in Section 21, where you had nothing to give, and the housing discomforts in Section 23, where you were barely tolerated. This looms another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern skills useless in a world of shuttles and yarn. You're wishing for a desk job, but you're stuck, and every snap of thread feels like a step closer to being useless. As the craftsman hovers, you try a desperate move, rethreading the shuttle with exaggerated care, hoping it buys time. He pauses, but his folded arms say he's not impressed, and you're not sure if you'll pass or be kicked out. You're still feverish, still clumsy, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, grip the shuttle, and brace for the next thread, knowing every knot is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's artisans don't suffer fools gladly. You're staggering out of the weaver's workshop, your tangled threads earning you a grunt of dismissal, when you realize you're utterly lost in Persepolis's maze of streets, with no sense of time in a world without clocks. As an outsider, in the Achaemenid Empire, you're grappling with the confusion of ancient timekeeping, where vague markers like sunrise or shadows leave you floundering to track your day. The air's thick with the scent of baking bread and dust, and you're clutching your backpack, scanning the sky for clues. But your feverish brain and modern reliance on digital clocks are failing you. You're learning fast that survival means syncing with a rhythm you can't grasp, and you're already late for everything. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire used basic timekeeping, like sundials for elites or water clocks in temples, but commoners relied on natural cues, sun, stars, or roosters. You're not a priest with a fancy device. You're a shaky nobody from Section 1, squinting at the sun's angle, guessing it's maybe afternoon, but your fever from Section 11 makes every shadow blur. Your language barrier from Section 2 stops you from asking a passerby, and you're trying to count hours since dawn. But the weaving fiasco in Section 27-8 up Huna's house. You're wishing for a smartwatch, but here, time's a guess, and you're guessing wrong. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians marked time by burning incense sticks, their length tied to tasks like prayer or market hours. You're imagining lighting one to track your escape plan, and you joke to yourself that you'd probably set your robe from Section 9 on fire instead. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you realize you're due back at the mud brick house from Section 23, and you've got no idea how late you are. You think back to the bandit ambush in Section 26, where timing your cough saved you. Now, you're wondering if being late will spark more gossip from Section 24, branding you even weirder. Historians still argue whether ancient timekeeping was practical or chaotic for daily life. Some say natural cues kept things simple, while others think the lack of precision frustrated outsiders like you used to exact schedules. You're leaning toward chaotic as you pass a sundial in a courtyard, its shadow useless without knowing how to read it. The social hierarchy from Section 4 makes you a nobody, and your gender roles from Section 13 mean you're expected to keep up with the day's pace. No excuses. You're tempted to just sit and wait for night, But you know, lingering draws spy's eyes from section 16. And you're not keen on another interrogation. You're trying to adapt. Watching a merchant nearby who glances at the sky before packing. His stall, his movements tied to some unspoken clock. You mimic him, tilting your head like you're checking the sun, but you're clueless, and a kid nearby snickers, probably spotting your confusion. You crack another joke to yourself, maybe. You'll invent the first Persian wristwatch and get rich, then remember you're broke from Section 21's tax dodge. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you moving as you realize this isn't just disorientation. It's a survival test. With every missed cue risking your place in a world that runs on rhythm, not mercy. The timekeeping confusion ties into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't ask for the hour, and your outsider status makes you a target for impatience. You think back to the festival exclusion in Section 19, where you missed the main event, and the communication delays in Section 22, where your message never sent. This timeless haze is another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern obsession, with schedules useless in a world of shadows and roosters. You're wishing for a ticking clock, but you're stuck. And every vague moment feels like a step closer to trouble in an empire that doesn't wait for stragglers. As you wonder, a man shouts from a stall, maybe closing up, and you try a desperate move, pointing at the sun and shrugging, hoping he'll clue you in. He just waves you off, muttering, and you're still adrift. You're not sure if you'll find your way or just wander till dark, but you're not giving up. You adjust your robe, squint at the sky again, and keep walking, bracing for the next time-blind blunder, knowing every lost hour is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's clock isn't ticking in your favor. You're wandering Persepolis winding streets, still clueless about the time and your fever making every step a slog, when dark clouds roll in, and a sudden storm unleashes torrents of rain and howling winds. As an outsider in the Empire, you're facing the brutal unpredictability of weather extremes, where a clear day can turn deadly in moments, and your modern reliance on forecasts leaves you unprepared. The air's thick with the scent of wet earth and panic, and you're clutching your backpack, your robe from Section 9 soaking through as you scramble for shelter. You're learning fast that survival means battling nature's wrath, and you're outmatched in this ancient deluge. Mainstream history tells us the Persian Empire's climate was harsh, with scorching summers giving way to sudden storms or flash floods, especially in spring. You're not a farmer who knows the signs. You're a feverish nobody from Section 1, caught in a downpour that's turning the dirt streets into rivers of mud. Your sneakers are sinking, ruined since Section 3's desert heat. And your language barrier from Section 2 stops you from asking locals where to hide. You're slipping, your fever from Section 11 blurring your vision, and you're wishing for an umbrella or a weather app. But here, it's you against the elements, and the storm's winning. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Persians built small stone shelters along roads for travelers to duck storms, often shared with goats or donkeys. You're imagining cramming into one with a grumpy camel from Section 18, and you joke to yourself that you'd take its spit over this soaking any day. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as lightning cracks, and you dive under a sagging awning, its leaks dripping on your head. You think back to the timekeeping mess in Section 28, where you lost track of hours. Now, you're wondering if you'll survive long enough to care about the sun's position. Historians still argue whether the Empire's people adapted well to weather extremes or suffered from their unpredictability. Some say mud brick homes and qanats managed floods, while others point to crop losses and stranded travelers like you, caught off guard. You're leaning towards suffered as mud sucks at your feet, and a gust nearly rips your backpack away. The social hierarchy from Section 4 means no one's offering you their dry courtyard. And the gossip from Section 24 probably marks you as too weird to help. You're tempted to give up and sit in the mud. But you know hypothermia a worse threat than your fever. And spies from Section 16 might still be watching. You're trying to adapt. Watching a local woman nearby dash for a doorway, her veil plastered to her face, but her steps sure. You mimic her, lurching toward a nearby wall, but you slip, landing in a puddle with a splash that'd make a camel laugh. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll start a Persian storm survival scroll and list don't wear sneakers as rule 1. It's a shaky chuckle, but it keeps you crawling as you realize this isn't just a soaking, it's a survival test. With every gust threatening to finish what your fever started, you're starting to respect the Persians' resilience. Even if you're a soggy proof of what not to do, the weather extremes tie into your survival mess. Your language barrier means you can't ask for shelter, and your outsider status makes you a low-priority guest. You think back to the craft failure in Section 27, where you proved useless, and the housing discomforts in Section 23, where you were barely tolerated. This storm's another hurdle, and you're stumbling, your modern weather apps useless in a world of sudden squalls. You're wishing for a raincoat, but you're stuck, and every shiver feels like a step closer to collapse in an empire that doesn't coddle the drenched dot as you huddle under the awning. A kid peers from a doorway, maybe curious about your pathetic state. You try a weak wave, hoping for mercy, but he ducks back inside, and you're alone again. You're not sure if you'll find dry shelter, but you're not giving up. You adjust your sodden robe, tuck your backpack closer, and brace for the next gust, knowing every drop is another obstacle in your 24-hour survival sprint. And the Empire's weather isn't here to show you kindness. You're shivering under the dripping awning, the storm's fury fading to a drizzle, your sodden robe clinging like a second skin as you reflect on the Persians' incredible resilience amid the Empire's relentless challenges. As an outsider, in the Achaemenid Empire, you're marveling at how these people thrive despite the dangers you've barely survived. Bandits, storms, and a society that demands constant vigilance. The air's now soft with the scent of wet clay and distant fires, and you're clutching your backpack, your fever from Section 11 still simmering but your awe growing. You're learning fast that survival here is a testament to human grit, and you're humbled, even if you're falling apart. Mainstream history tells us the Achaemenid Empire endured for centuries, its people adapting to harsh climates, diverse cultures, and constant threats through ingenuity and endurance. You're not a Persian, just a shaky nobody from Section 1, but you've seen their strength up close from the weavers in Section 27, who master their craft, to the traders who brave the royal road despite bandits from Section 26. You're leaning against the wall, watching a family nearby share a loaf under their own awning, their laughter defying the storm's chaos from Section 29. You're wishing for their toughness, but your modern softness, spoiled by clocks and comforters, no match for their iron will. Here's a quirky tidbit. Persians sometimes celebrated survival with small clay charms, etched with symbols of protection, worn after dodging dangers like floods or raids. You're imagining crafting one for surviving this day, and you joke to yourself that yours to say beat fever, bandits, and bad stew with a doodle of your pen from Section 15. It's a quick laugh, but it fades as you cough, your body, reminding you of the sanitation nightmare in section 14, and the dodgy food from section 5. You think back to the gossip trap in section 24, where you were judged. Now, you're starting to see the Persians' unity. Their shared strength, a shield against a world that's tried to break you. Historians still argue whether the empire's resilience came from cultural cohesion or sheer necessity. Some say shared rituals like Nowruz from section 19 built bonds, while others think survival forged their grit, forcing them to outlast every challenge. You're leaning toward necessity as you watch a man trudge through the mud, his face set but unbowed, like he's faced 100 storms. The social hierarchy from section 4 kept you down, and your language barrier from section 2 left you voiceless. But you're awed by how these people, nobles, commoners, even the spies from section 16 keep going. Their lives in endurance. You're failing spectacularly. You're trying to soak in their spirit, mimicking the family's calm as they pass around their bread, ignoring the drizzle. You dig out the barley from section 19's festival, nibbling it for strength, but it's soggy, and you chuckle weakly, thinking you'd trade it for a hot meal. You crack another joke to yourself. Maybe you'll write a Persian Grit 101. Scroll and flunk with honors for whining about wet robes. It's a shaky laugh, but it keeps you grounded as you realize this isn't just admiration, it's a survival lesson, showing you what it takes to endure when the empire's every corner tests your will. You're starting to respect their unbreakable core, even if you're crumbling. Their resilience ties into your survival mess. Your outsider status made you a target. From the tax demands in section 21 to the conscription scare in section 12. You think back to the craft failure in section 27, where you proved useless, and the timekeeping haze in section 28, where you lost your bearings. Their strength is another hurdle, and you're humbled. Your modern fragility, no match for their forged-in-fire lives. You're wishing for their stamina, but you're stuck. And every ache feels like a reminder you're not built for this world. Yet you're still here, barely. As the rain slows, you lean back. The family's firelight flickering across the street, their voices a soft hum. The storm's gone, and so's some of your fear, replaced by a quiet respect for these people who carry on no matter what. Your fever lingers, but your heart's steadier, warmed by their example. The stars peek through the clouds, gentle now, and you feel a calm settle, like the mud beneath you's finally still. You're not one of them, but you've glimpsed their strength, and it's enough to carry you into sleep, your breath slowing. The empire's pulse fading into a whisper. You pull your wet robe closer, let your eyes drift shut, and slip into dreams where resilience is your guide, and the world's challenges feel just a little less heavy. Asterisks, sweet dreams.